Who the Wild Things Are with Ryan McGuire.
You gotta listen to your body.
Oh my God, maybe, I could get out there, I could do this.
Let's take a ride, find your wild side, real stories, see with your own eyes.
It's so beautiful.
I'm gonna have the best time out here.
I was in tears, I was just like, that's the best, man.
Welcome back to Who the Wild Things Are. My name is Ryan McGuire, and I'm here to bring you conversations with the most wild folks on the planet. If you're enjoying the podcast, please leave us a rating and review on your podcast platform of choice. And if you enjoyed the episode, share it with a friend. Appreciate you guys. Let's get it going. What's going on, guys? Today's episode is brought to you by GoRuck. Just started working with this company, and man, am I obsessed with their products. They are specialists when it comes to rucking gear. So sandbags, plate carriers, weight vests, anything you're going to use in a ruck, GoRuck is your company. They make the toughest gear around, and right now, if you use code WYLD10, that's WYLD 10 at checkout, it'll get you guys some cash off your gear. So go ahead, check out GoRuck at GoRuck.com or use the link in the show notes. Get yourself some gear. Let me know how it goes. Thank you guys for listening. Let's do the show. Well, let's get it going. Cait, thanks for joining. It's been a little bit. I feel like I haven't seen you that much lately.
I know.
All the crazy stuff going on in your life, but
I know.
True. I was trying to think today when we met.
I think we met this summer after you found Eric on Strava. And then you just started showing up to his house for weekend workouts, and we were there too. Known Eric for like 5 years. 6 years? 7 years? No. 6 years. But I think it was at those workouts. You just started showing up, and we were like, who's this dude? No, you were playing ping pong with Stu. You guys went on a trail run. That's the first time I met you. And my husband and Eric went on a trail run together.
That's right.
And then I came over, and you were like, I remember you were like, you guys look like you know each other. Like, when I came down into the basement, you were like, the way you guys looked at each other, I think you know each other.
That's true.
I was like, this dude is different. Like, no one says something like that. So, yeah, I think that's when we met you. And then Stu was like, as soon as you started talking about what you do, I was like, my husband's gone. He's, like, going out into the wilderness with this guy.
Yeah. You guys immediately were interested in the wilderness stuff, and we got to do the family course. That's still one of my favorite courses from last year. Got to take you and your family out. You got a good gang. We
did, yeah. It was a fun time. It was sweet. It was just different, you know?
Yeah.
I just wanted to do some different stuff. But my family's like always up for whatever. We have our own challenges and issues just like any family, but they're a rowdy, fun crew, so I can't complain too much.
Yeah, they're awesome. And stuff. Yeah, like you said, it's like very rare that you see a family that's like, oh, what'd you guys do for your family weekend? Like, oh, we went in the woods, like made fire sticks, ate dandelions.
Yeah. Tried not to cut our hands off with those crazy sharp knives that you gave us.
Yeah. That's what I do. I allow you guys to cut yourselves.
Yeah. I don't think anyone cut themselves, surprisingly.
No, it was all good. Yeah. No blood was spilled.
Yeah, we still have those knives.
Good. Yeah, they're awesome. They're more knives. Yeah. So sweet. Let's dive in a little bit to your background. Maybe if I was an alien landing here, tell me a little bit about who Cait Crowell is and sort of what you do.
Ooh, loaded question right off the bat. Well, from like a business standpoint, I guess I'll start there, like professionally. I am a functional nutritionist. I have certifications in nutritional therapy and restorative wellness solutions and master blood chemistry, all sorts of different stuff. And I started getting into this work because I had a bunch of anxiety and panic attacks and gastro issues growing up that doctors didn't have answers to, and just threw me on a bunch of meds and antacids and like had answers for me that weren't really answers. And I still had questions like a diagnosis of IBS. It's like your gut's irritable. Why is my gut irritable? What caused that? Why is it irritated? Why is it inflamed? And I just couldn't seem to find any answers. So this all came to a head when I was 20. I was studying global public health, which is essentially like health of populations in developing countries. So I got a wild hair and was like, if I'm so into this, I want to know what it's actually like being in the field. So I flew by myself, like a crazy fucking person, to Bangladesh and lived there for a summer and worked in this like international research hospital with women and children in their nutrition rehabilitation unit.
Okay.
But I got to see the whole hospital, and it was like probably exactly what you have in your mind. Like super simple global life-saving solutions on a mass scale. And I got to see everything. Like I got to see people with, like elephantiasis, when you have like those massive swollen limbs from mosquito bites, crazy tropical diseases, people with tuberculosis,
That's babies. A big one, right? Tuberculosis there.
TB's big. I mean, everything's big there, right? It's like most of what this research hospital does is focused on looking at diarrheal disease. So like cholera, communicable diseases, things like that. And like most people in Bangladesh die from dehydration from diarrhea disease, which is fucking crazy.
It's not surprising though. I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me just based on those diseases of the symptoms that come along with them. The most dangerous being fluids leaving your body. Yeah, and minerals.
I mean, like there's so much. So yeah, that was like a crazy time. But so I mean, even though I got to see the whole hospital, I was largely just focused on working in the nutrition rehabilitation unit. So I studied global public health, but I minored in nutrition. And I was like, going through my own health issues, asking all these questions. I got to see this hospital function on a mass scale. And I just remember being pissed the whole time I was there because I was like, there's so much that can be prevented before these people even get to this point. Like there's education gaps. There's so many gaps. And that's when I was like, I think I want to do nutrition. Like, I think this is where a lot of these missing pieces are. And there's a lot of other things I looked at too, like vitamin A deficiency and night blindness and zinc deficiency and like gut tight junction cell regulation of like leaky gut, autoimmunity, all sorts of stuff. So I looked at specific nutrient therapies when I was in Bangladesh too. I did a case study on children and like stunted growth from certain nutrient deficiencies and vitamin D deficiencies and kwashiorkor, like all these different crazy things that we used to have in the US, but we're dealing with chronic issues here now. We're in the developing country. You have a lot of those communicable and still chronic issues with nutrition. But I think it's between like my experience personally of being like, there's these gaps that I'm experiencing in the developed world. And there's gaps in the developing world, and like nutrition can bridge the gap on a lot of those things of prevention, healing, like all this stuff. So I just jumped headfirst into all the nutrition stuff.
What is the number one thing that they're missing? I'm sure it's a multi-pronged approach, but what is the thing they don't have access to that would solve the most of those problems?
Oh my God.
Is it clean water? Is it a caloric thing?
I mean, like honestly, everything.
Sanitation.
All of it. Like it's literally open sewage systems. Okay. It's like I got super sick while I was there. Like you walk in the streets, it's like 90, 100 degrees out, 99% humidity. Like it's just swampy. And they have monsoon seasons, like these open sewage systems that are like literally shit and piss running right down the street next to the sidewalk. Like as soon as the skies open up, that's in the road. Yeah. It's everywhere. Sure. And I spent a lot of my time in Dhaka, so that's like their capital city, but the bulk of Bangladesh is very rural. I mean, you go out to the middle of nowhere essentially. And I did spend some time in one of their separate locations that's called MATLAB, and they do a lot of like rural education and vaccinations and like more simple global life-saving solutions, not in a hospital setting. So I got to go see a bunch of like how they do things there. But I mean, it's just like the most basic human necessities are just like there's no infrastructure. There's no rules and regulations around like you have to have a sewage system and this is the standard. Like there's just none. There's none of those things. It's
sort of a hierarchy of needs thing. It's like, well, why don't they take care of that? It's like, well, these people are mainly focused on getting enough calories to live through the end of the day. So if you're worried about that and you don't have money to sustain your life, then where your poop is going is a lot less important. Yeah. It's not at the top of your mind.
Right. Well, and the knowledge too, it's like, here in the US and other developed countries, like we all know, like don't eat where you shit, don't touch your poop, don't drink water that you're shitting in, like just common knowledge. But they don't know these things. They largely, a lot of these people live in the slums. They're uneducated. They only know certain things based on what their grandmother or their mother taught them. I mean, women are getting married and having children at like 12, 13, 14 years old. Like the bulk of the women and children that I was working with in the NRU, Nutrition Rehabilitation Unit, were, super young, multiple kids. And it's terrible. Like the thing that's really sad is like watching these young mothers that I was working with, they were really just disappointed in themselves. They were like, I'm doing everything I can and the best that I know. And like, I'm still here. Like my kid is still sick. Like there's such a huge gap.
Yeah.
So that was really wild. And it's crazy because that's like a lot of the world. Like there's
Absolutely.
a lot of humans just surviving in the world. It's
Yeah,
crazy.
and we don't see it because it's not in our face every day. But I mean, like you said, it's in a lot of places. My early years, I would say until I was maybe, well, it's still this way, but microfinance has always been like a deep obsession of mine, because I've always felt like the way to fix that is to bring people out of poverty, not necessarily help them out by giving more things, because in my mind that creates more of a cycle and keeps them there.
It does, yeah. I mean, it's more than just, it's not like money is not the only problem.
Right.
It's
so
multifaceted.
The issue becomes like, how do you create enterprise there? And there's not enough return on investment for any banks to want to lend to them. So in Bangladesh and some of those areas, for example, there was this bank called Grameen Bank. Have you ever heard of them?
Yep. Brak Bank. Grameen Bank. Those were like huge out there. Yeah.
Yeah. So they're basically giving low or no interest loans to young entrepreneurs, mainly women. So they try to do it exactly the opposite of traditional loans, which is instead of charging interest, they use social pressure, low interest loans. Instead of giving it to men, they try to only loan to women. And they basically try and do everything the exact opposite to facilitate the transfer of wealth or the generation of wealth in places like that.
Yeah, it's fascinating. There's a lot of that too with like farm animals, because if you have animals, then you have food, and if you can, you know, obviously reproduce and, you know, multiply the animals that you have, there's a lot of benefit to that, because you can sell them, you can do so much stuff with that too. So it's wild. It's like literally a whole other world.
Yeah, there's a lot of work to be done there. I think it's great that we have people like you that are interested in helping out and serving those
it's good stuff
that need it. So you've got this passion for fixing these sort of diseases, and then you come back to the States. And how did it progress from there? Did you have to study more or like change your studies or?
Yeah, good question. So, I mean, when I came back, I was like, shit, like how do I want to get into nutrition in this way? And what does it look like? You know, what is it like? I kind of had this idea in my head of like, I know the kind of nutrition and practice that I want to carry on, but I don't know how to like get educated in the way that I'm hoping that I will. And the only thing that really is available, largely speaking, is the RD program, so the registered dietitian route. But that's, you know, essentially partnered with USDA, FDA, Monsanto, these large governmental organizations that are also in bed with big pharma. And there's tons of, you know, there's just a lot of convoluted information. And a lot of my professors in college were people who were RDs, and they were just very narrow-minded. So like a lot of my undergrad papers, like my undergrad thesis, I wrote on gluten and zonulin and tight junction cells and autoimmunity. So there's this researcher when I was in college, Alessio Fasano, that had done all of this incredible groundbreaking research on like the root of autoimmunity stemming from gut health, from tight junction cells in the small intestine, having these gaps, having leaky gut. And he was researching like what drives that. So one of the major things that he found was that gluten is one of the top gatekeepers of essentially determining whether those tight junction cells are open or closed. And it really opens the door for autoimmunity. So I wrote my undergrad thesis paper on all this stuff because I was like, holy shit, this is unbelievable. Started digging into it, found a bunch of other research that aligned with it, presented my research of like, here's what I want to write my thesis on. And my professor was like, that's not a real thing. Like, I don't think there's enough research about this. Like, gluten doesn't relate to whatever. Like, I just had a ton of professors that were like not asking critical thinking questions. And I was like, we're in a science degree. Like, we should be able to ask these questions. This is why we're going to school. So I was like, man, I don't know if I want to go like this RD route. So I ended up looking into a ton of different programs. So I looked into like chiropractic school, acupuncture, Chinese medicine, naturopathic doctorates programs, all sorts of different things. But obviously a lot of those are like 4 or 5 more years of school, shit tons more money. And I was like, I just want to get my hands wet. Like, I want to get my hands dirty. I want to work with people. I want to learn some things. So I ended up going through this certification program the Nutritional Therapy Association puts on. It's like an NTP. So that was my first cert out of college, my Nutritional Therapy Practitioner certification. And it's essentially just the baseline foundation of just how the body functions. And it's like exactly what I was hoping that I would get as a foundational education, like straight out of college. So it really put into place, like, it really solidified the belief that I had, and it validated so much that, like, the body is designed to heal itself. And it's not stupid. Nature is smarter than science. Our bodies are incredibly intelligent. And if we can provide the correct environment for the body to thrive, it will. And so that was like my first cert of like, holy crap, these things that I've been thinking and hoping for and like had in my heart and in my mind of like, I hope this exists because this is exactly how I want to practice. And I feel like there's this gap. It like opened that door.
So it's more of like a natural philosophical take on it rather than treating symptoms with medicine. It's more of looking at what your body's naturally trying to do and facilitating those relationships.
Yeah, exactly. And looking at like, they look at the 5 foundations in the NTA programs. It's like hydration, blood sugar regulation, fatty acid balance, mineral balance, and digestion. So like if all of those things, this is their belief, is like, if all of those things are set in balance, then everything else in the body can come into balance too.
Which is much easier said than done, obviously.
100%. Especially in the modern world where we're like constantly inundated. Like we are not hardwired genetically to live in the environment that we live in. So in my opinion, like in order to really be in optimal health and strive for optimal health, I think no matter what era of the world you're living in, you're always in some state of survival. But especially now, I think there's just like you really have to swim upstream for like good food sourcing, quality foods, you know, lower environmental load. Just, oh my gosh, there's a lot.
And I feel like, I mean, I naturally have had this distrust for like, you know, Western medicine, I guess, as it is now. I think a lot of it. So when I was 2 weeks old, I almost died from meningitis.
Holy crap.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy. And
Jeez.
They saved me, so I'm very thankful for those doctors. I lived. That was all great. There's like all these videos of like me as a little potato baby, and there's like tons of cords, and like it looks like a scene out of a movie. And yeah, so I had like 101 degree fever, and my mom's like, he's fine, like he's 2 weeks old, he just has a baby fever.
Yeah.
My dad's like, maybe we take him in, and they're like, yeah, your kid's about to die, kind of thing.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, fevers are crazy when babies are
wild.
tiny. They can get exacerbated real fast.
Yeah, and so they had to pump me full of antibiotics like as a baby. And then throughout my like toddler into young preteen years, I had crazy migraines.
Interesting.
Like I would have to like hit my head against metal or like push it really hard against metal to like release the pressure, or have my brothers like push my head in, and I would just vomit, like projectile vomit, like while it was happening. It was the craziest thing.
Gosh.
And I went to all these specialists, like traditional headache specialists. They all just prescribed medicine for me. Oops. They all just prescribed different medicines, and none of them worked.
Yeah.
And I went to a Chinese doctor, or a guy who had studied Chinese medicine. He put some vials in my hand and moved my arm up and down.
Oh yeah, muscle testing.
Yeah, and he's like, you have a ton of yeast in your body that can't be killed because you use so many antibiotics as a kid. Your body can't fight this off. He's like, if you take these pills, like starting in a week, you'll never have migraines again. And I've never had one since.
That's amazing.
And like I mean, it took him 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And I had been to like all these expensive high-end like research facilities, not a single answer.
Yeah.
And he just basically tested for what nutrients were and were not in my body.
Yeah.
It's like the most basic approach.
Right.
And it solved it like immediately. And
Yeah.
then from then on out, I'm like, okay, I'm a little sketched out about doctors now, because
Yeah. I think it's a hard thing because there's totally a time and place for Western medicine, right? Like when you had meningitis, like you don't want to come to someone like me or that Chinese medicine doctor. Like you want to go to the freaking hospital and get that shit figured out.
Absolutely.
But I think we tip the scales where, like, to me, it's a system issue, right? Like if you look at the medical system and like the industrial medical model that we have, like it's really only designed for one very narrow sect of people who are sick. And it's people who fall into a disease category, who have a clear diagnosis, but then the treatment is always either medication or surgery. And that's just how doctors are trained. And to some extent, you know, I'm obviously in the holistic side, but like on the medical defense, it's like, this isn't their fault. It's not the doctor's fault that they were not taught or trained to critically think about things outside of the scope of their practice. Like, you know, they are really just educated on problems, diagnosing, and treating. And it's a very clear line, and it's with insurance codes, and they're bound to these really intense laws. So it's just, in my opinion, it just sucks that that's the medical model that we have, that we still have. And it creates like this category of people that I often refer to as the walking sick, where like maybe you don't fall into a disease category, and like maybe the doctors can't diagnose you because you don't fall into a disease category for them with like certain codes and certain markers and a pattern that they need to diagnose so that they can treat in a certain way. And if that's not happening, then they can't help you.
Yeah.
And that is like a massive group of the population. And like, that's the group of people that I work with, and the group of people that, you know, it sounds like that Chinese medicine doctor worked with when you went to go see him. Cause it's like, if you exhaust the medical model, like they're kind of like, oh, sorry, I don't know what the fuck to do with you now. Like,
yeah,
which sucks.
And you had a little bit of that in your past, right? You had was it mold?
Yeah. Gosh. I feel like this is just like my life path. Like, I don't know what your guys' religious beliefs are, but for me, it's like, I just feel like I chose and God chose for me to be like, you're going to eat shit and you're going to be so passionate to figure it out that when you do figure it out, you're going to go help a bunch of other people.
It's so important to have that eating shit phase.
Yeah. Fuck those phases, though. They're so rough.
They're important,
like the
though.
hardest phases.
Nobody likes a story where everything goes well, though.
No, you got to prove it. You got to go
have
there.
Those stages.
100%. So I feel like I've had waves of that. Like, you know, growing up, it was like anxiety, panic attacks, not knowing what the hell's happening to me, like feeling crazy, being diagnosed with like panic disorder and being like, disorder? Like, what the hell? I have all these problems with me. But like, I was living in a house that had mold and I didn't know it. And I grew up in a house that like, you know, was a little emotionally unstable, like nothing crazy. I have incredible parents, but like, you know, there's just some nuance there that was like pretty stressful as a kid that I took on myself and internalized a lot of things that created a ton of anxiety as well, compounded on like an environment that was really toxic. Like we had black mold in our basement, and at the time, and my parents did the best that they could, but like they just painted over it. But like spores travel and they go through an HVAC system and they get breathed throughout the rest of your home. Like your HVAC are the lungs of your home. So I didn't know any of this shit until Stu and I, this was in, 2019. We moved into a house that had a shitload of mold in it. We had no idea. It was like this adorable, cute little house. It was our first home that we bought. We were like so psyched. And the crawl space under the home, it was a 2,000 square foot ranch, but the entire crawl space was like loaded with mold.
And probably a really big crawl space.
Yeah, well, it was probably like, I don't know, 3-4 feet deep, and it was the entire 2,000 square feet underneath the house.
So lots of room for darkness and moisture and all the things that mold and fungi love.
It was like an incubator for like the worst mold species that impact human health.
Did you guys see it down there?
We didn't. So here's kind of the fucked up thing that like if anyone is listening to this podcast, like when you buy a home, get your general inspection, and if you're like prone to health issues, get a mold inspector. General inspectors usually don't catch mold. Ours didn't, and we even had a general inspector back in before we did a mold inspection, and he didn't find anything. And then when we had like a genuine mold inspector, he was like, oh my god, this is like one of the worst homes I've ever seen.
No.
So the whole process of uncovering all of that was like really kind of a crazy story. Like it started with my health tanking. It was like slowly like all of these symptoms that I had growing up started coming back, and I had kind of put them all into remission. Like I didn't have IBS anymore. I didn't have anxiety and panic attacks anymore. Like all this stuff was just gone. And then we moved into this place, and it was like I was kind of anxious. I was kind of having trouble sleeping. I was having like these weird fucked up dreams. And then my stomach like went south. I was having like this crazy bile diarrhea of like super bright neon colors, like maybe TMI for the podcast. I feel like I talk about poop all the time with clients.
That's okay. Bring it.
Just go there. But it was just a really weird experience. And I remember thinking like, something's really off. Like this is really weird. This is different. And Stu and I at the time unexpectedly got pregnant, unexpectedly lost the baby that we had at like 7 weeks right before the first ultrasound. And that was like the big wake up call. Like I had all these symptoms that were piling, but I was like, I'm good. Like I got this. I'll figure it out. Like I'm taking these supplements. Like I've been here before. I've got this figured, I can take care of it. And it just wasn't getting better. And I think I was kind of in denial of how bad it was getting. And then once we had the miscarriage, I was like, whoa, like slap in the face. There's something really wrong here. Like Stu and I've both been really healthy for a long time. Like, I don't know why I would be having a miscarriage this early. So yeah, I had a lot of colleagues. I mean, I was running my blood work because I pull all my blood panels in functional labs like 2 times a year consistently to see what's going on. And there was just all this weird stuff showing up, patterns I had never seen before, things I had never seen before. So I went to multiple functional medicine doctors in Denver. No one could tell me what was wrong. It was like the same whole story again, like what you experienced, what I experienced when I was younger. It was like the same BS, not for lack of trying. It was just like these people didn't know. And so
I haven't been trained to go through that. I'm
100%.
curious. I've been getting some blood work lately. What were the things that showed up that you knew, like the alarm was going off in your head when you saw those?
Yeah, I mean, at the time, I'm trained now to help people detox mold and look for these patterns and parasites and all sorts of stuff after like going through this 2 years ago and now helping like hundreds of people go through this stuff now. It totally changed my practice because at the time this all happened, like I was actively working with a ton of clients on like nutrition and root cause work and all this stuff, but I was hitting these walls where like 80% of my clients were doing great and 20% were like not getting better. And I was like, what is this? What is this? And then I went through all this shit and then had these crazy patterns. So at first I didn't really understand like what was going on, but like now of course I can speak to like what those patterns look like. So, you know, with mold, like some of the biggest things that show up are, I mean, it's kind of like a cascade of a bunch of different stuff because it's rare that you're ever going to see like mold isolated by itself. You usually see it with like immune dysregulation, red blood cells off and out of whack, and like parasite markers because they kind of all go hand in hand.
Okay.
But the biggest thing for me was like my red blood cells, hemoglobin, hematocrit. I had a bunch of cellular dehydration markers, which is super common for mold because it literally dehydrates your body on a cellular level. It's just like soaking up everything from the cells. I also had super low cholesterol, really low biomarkers, and very low CO2. So CO2 and oxygenation of your blood cells when you're looking at a CPC is really common too. Because again, those, you know, mold is really choking out the cells on a cellular level.
Is it in the body?
Yes.
So the mold is now inside of you?
Yes. So mold, if you look at the anatomy of mold, it has like its flowering head, the body, and a root. It's like a tree. It has a whole root system.
Like a mushroom.
Exactly. Just like a mushroom. But some molds, not all molds, have toxins that they release called mycotoxins. So there's about 7 to 10 species of molds that are toxic to the human body. Some of them are, some of them aren't. And I think common knowledge, a lot of us think like, oh, if it's not black mold, it's not a big deal. And that's not true. So like there's Aspergillus, penicillium, black mold's like official scientific name is Stachyboitries. So like Stachy is really hard to get rid of. It is like one of the worst molds to deal with, but there's a ton of other molds that are just as terrible, if not worse, depending upon your genetics and like your toxic burden as to how your body can or cannot detox these mycotoxins. So the way that these mycotoxins work is they kind of like branch off of the flowering head of the mold and they travel. And they're essentially attacking things, right? Like all
you
plants.
said when they branch off, is that the spores?
No, so mycotoxins and spores are different. So spores are like the seeds.
Because mycotoxin sounds like mycelium. That's why I'm like trying. I wonder. Oh, I guess mycologist.
I need to like draw a picture.
I guess does Mike mean fungi? Maybe
Myco, like MYCO.
Does that mean fungi?
Maybe.
Okay.
I would assume so.
Mycologist.
I would assume so.
Yeah. Okay.
But I actually don't really know. But so there's like the flowering head, the body, the root system that connects to a bunch of other, you know, species, just like any type of fungus. But out of that flowering head, spores will release. Whereas kind of like their seeds, spores are like their seeds. But these toxins, these mycotoxins, it's a defense chemical. So like, as we all know, plants have defense chemicals. They can't like get up and run away. They can't bite whatever's trying to attack them. So they have these defense chemicals. That's what these mycotoxins are. So mold will often release these mycotoxins when they're being threatened. So like people who will go in and they're like, oh, I found black mold, I'll just scrape all this crap off. Like you're actually creating microscopic explosions of these mycotoxins that you're exposing yourself to.
So don't do that. If I find some in the basement, I shouldn't do that.
Don't mess with it.
What should I do?
I would
curious.
reach out to like a mold inspection company, get it swab tested so you know what species you're dealing with, and then get it remediated by someone who like does remediation.
Those poor people though, like aren't they?
I know. Well, a
Just
well-educated group of people who have these businesses know that it's a biohazard that they're dealing with. The unfortunate thing is there's a lot of remediation companies that do a plethora of different things of like water damage and fire damage and mold damage, and they like loop it all in together. But the reality is like mold is a biotoxin and it's crazy toxic. So like the first guys we had come in look at our crawl space, they were like, yeah, sweet, go check it out. And they just like went down there, and I was like, these fucking dudes, like they have to be so sick. Like, I mean, how many houses are they doing this in? Like, how much of this terrible air are they breathing in? So like when we finally got like high quality, medically educated, treating mold like a biohazard that it is, these guys came in with like full
Hazmat suit,
respirators.
Well,
and
I just
was
found
like,
your new client
"Jeez,
list.
thank God."
You just call those
mold
companies. You can
inspection
literally
companies.
sell it. You just got your whole
For
client
real.
list.
It's so crazy.
That's wild.
Yeah, mold is really insane. The crazy thing about mold too, I think that's not really spoken about very much, is like, and honestly, toxins in general, like a plethora of environmental toxins too, not just mold, but mold especially is like very. It impacts the brain a ton, and it's got a really negative energy to it. So like the rates of depression, suicide ideation involved with people who are dealing with mold is like through the roof.
Wow.
It's like we'll get clients that have crazy emotional shit, and I'm like, we have to look for mold, and most of them have it, which is crazy.
That is remarkable to think that whatever you're going
absurd.
through, especially like non-event oriented depression, like that stuff
Yes.
where it's just like a normal day and you feel terrible,
Yeah,
could be caused by the stuff in your walls.
100%.
And
Well,
it
and
could
it's there's a lot that kind of plays into that, but there's this guy, Dr. Matt Pratt Hyatt. He's one of the scientists that created one of the first urine mycotoxin tests, which is how you test for mold, because the kidneys flush out a bunch of mycotoxins in the body. It's just the natural detox pathway. We kick it. But he is a researcher on genetics, toxicants, and their expression. And I had him on my podcast years ago, and he was just harping on like people who are dealing with non-event related depression, mental health, bipolar, schizophrenia. Like we have to look at environmental toxins and mold and Lyme and things like this, because they're all massively neuroinflammatory. And our whole belief system and like science around all of our mental health issues is largely focused on like, oh, you just have a chemical imbalance, and like that whole theory has been disproven. It's all inflammation related.
Or like
that's at the root.
psychotherapy, like, oh, you're depressed and you need to
Right.
go like talk to somebody about it and it'll all work itself out. Well, it's like
Right.
maybe, I guess what you're saying is
maybe
it's not have to do with that at all.
Right.
And it's totally based on your environmental toxins.
Yeah, it definitely could be. I mean, and especially for me, like kind of pulling it all together, like there's a process in the body called methylation. It's part of our major detoxification pathways. It happens billions of times every single second in every single cell in the body. So it's a massive, biochemical process in the body, but about 90% of like the activity of methylation happens in the liver. But you can have a bunch of different types of methylation mutations where your body is not processing or conjugating or has the correct cofactors to convert, an inactive form of a nutrient to an active form of a nutrient, or to take cofactors for GABA or cofactors for dopamine and properly process those things. So there's pathways on methylation mutation genetics where it can either impact mental health, it can impact physical health, it can impact nutrient processing. So for example, like I have a methylation mutation where my body doesn't convert beta carotene, which is the inactive form of vitamin A, into retinol. So like if I want to get vitamin A, which is massively important to like your eye health, your skin health, it's one of our top fat soluble vitamins. If I want to make sure that I have good stores of vitamin A and I'm not going to like have macular degeneration and like get night blindness and not see at night and then start to lose my vision as I get older, like I have to eat red meat. I have to get retinol from like real bioavailable sources. I can't just eat carrots. Like if I were plant-based, I would have like the worst health ever because of my methylation status.
So let's dive into that a little bit.
Crazy.
You're saying methylation being these natural processes in your body. Why is it more advantageous for you, or what makes meat more bioavailable than a plant or than a capsule?
So when we're talking about bioavailability, we're essentially looking at how easily and readily absorbed and utilized nutrients are from our food. So if we think about like a synthetic supplement capsule that you'd buy, most people are familiar with like Nature Made, which, side note, is an absolute shit supplement company. Don't eat that crap.
Don't eat it.
Don't eat it. Don't consume it. But a lot of these synthetic isolated nutrients, they're not in a synergistic form. They're not recognized by the body. Bioavailability is extremely low. One of my favorite examples to share around this is like vitamin C. So if you like go to the store and you look at vitamin C capsules, huge through COVID, huge through flu season, any season, most forms of vitamin C are ascorbic acid. If you flip that supplement around and you look, it'll say ascorbic acid, like 1,000 milligrams, whatever. So ascorbic acid is actually like the outer layer of the molecule of vitamin C. And if you look in nature, let's say like in an orange or a lime or a lemon, citrus has rose hips, all these great things that are high in vitamin C. There's a shit ton of other nutrients and compounds that work synergistically for the optimal absorption and the bioavailability of the vitamin C that's in that food. So like as humans, we're hardwired to eat real food from the planet that we have, grown on and into. So like when we start to try to outsmart nature and we say, oh, vitamin C is really good, we've recognized this, let's isolate this nutrient, pull out the most important part, and then like, high dose the crap out of it, and like that's great for immunity. There's some truth to that, but you're also missing out on genuine bioavailability of your body being able to utilize that nutrient on a high level. So, from a supplement standpoint, I think that's massively important. So like all the supplements that I work with are all whole food based. Like we don't isolate individual nutrients. We don't use synthetic form of nutrients. I work with all these supplement companies that are all food based. And then, like with meat versus plants, this is controversial.
Sure.
But the reality is meat is much more bioavailable than plants are, because plants have a bunch of defense chemicals. They have, just like we were talking about with mold, it doesn't want to be eaten. It doesn't want to be attacked. It doesn't want to be, invaded on in any kind of way. So when we eat plants, we're consuming a bunch of anti-nutrients, lecithins, all sorts of different things.
Linoleic acid.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different things. It's not to say that plants are bad. It's just, I think for a lot of people looking to feel their absolute best, have the highest quality of performance, have the highest quality of sleep and sex drive and energy and recovery, like if you are just solely eating plants, the longevity of that, of your health span is questionable from like a bioavailability standpoint. And also from the standpoint that, meat has nutrients that are necessary and essential for optimal human function that plants just don't have. So like I'm not like carnivore. I don't think that like you should only eat meat and screw plants. Like not at all. I think we should be eating everything, and it should be food in its most whole form. But I do think meat is absolutely like a huge piece of an optimal healthy diet for humans for optimal function.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, obviously I eat a lot of meat, but I also think this like rise of this carnivore thing is a little bit ridiculous in some ways, that
100%.
we speak about. And to call things like vegetables, I wish if we were like going to discuss this in like a educated matter. I'm not a botanist or anything, but like using the term vegetable is just lazy at this point. Like, are we talking about a fruit, or are we talking about the roots? Because those two are completely different in all shapes and fashions.
Right.
They're as similar as the hoof of an animal and the heart of an animal, right?
Yeah. It's
roots and a fruit and a leaf and a stem.
Yeah.
They're all very different. So we can't just say plants are this and animals are that.
Right.
It's like, why don't we take a little bit closer look? Because clearly fruit is bright and beautiful and tastes great to all of us. And we've clearly grown to love it for more than one reason. So
I mean, we're hardwired to go after fruit, right? Like, we look for it. Like, it's primal to be like, oh, something bright and incredible. Exactly. Like, it must be great. And it usually is.
Exactly.
So there's an element of just, I don't know. I feel like where we're at in, like, the nutrition space and just in the world in general these days is, like, we have broken things down into the smallest point and then scrutinized the shit out of it and then started arguing about all those things. And it's like, we're forgetting the big picture. Like, we're forgetting the fact that, you know, like I was saying earlier, like, we're not hardwired for this crazy fast-paced modern environment that we're living in. We're not hardwired to eat like these frankenfoods that are chemically laden with like yellow number 5 and like glyphosate and God knows what of these like chemically created things. It's like there's so much that like that should really be a bigger part of the conversation. You know, on a larger scale, in my opinion, more so than like meat is bad, plants are bad, like pulling these food groups. It's like, to me, it's the quality. It's like, are these plants properly prepared? If they are full of anti-nutrients and lectins and all these different things, like you should be soaking, sprouting, and fermenting those foods so you're breaking those down and getting the nutrients that are in that food.
Right.
Like there's
Same
a way
thing
to
with
do
meat,
this.
right?
For sure.
How's the meat being processed? I'm sure, and maybe you can tell me more about this, but I would think the nutrient profiles of a cow that was grown in your neighbor's farm versus a cow that was farmed 2,000 miles away, and it was in a tiny little pen with 400 cows and then got shipped on a thing and then freeze-dried and then shipped again and ends up at your door. I think those two pieces of meat probably have very different nutrient profiles, and one's probably more bioavailable.
100%. It's funny because I just introduced you to Carter Country Meats.
Yeah.
And they're the best.
Yeah.
They're like just the nicest people.
They're great.
Legit AF. But so they just had third-party testing on the nutrient density of their meat, and they compared it to store-bought grass-fed beef. So their phytonutrient and amino acid profile, amino acids are building blocks of protein, so their protein structure and profile to their beef, and phytonutrients, very important micronutrients, are 65 to 75% higher than that of store-bought grass-fed beef because of those exact reasons.
Yep. And you have the nutrient piece of it, the health side of it, and then you have the fact that like you're gaining a personal relationship with the farmer and the person responsible for the food on your family's table.
100%.
Which is just as important in my mind as what's in the meat.
100%. And it's like, it's as nature intended, right? It's like this whole theme that we're kind of talking about of like nature is smarter than science. Like we've tried to outsmart the natural ways of how things just work, and it's like we need to slow down and back up. And I think that's the cool thing that Carter Country Meats does is like they have 40,000 acres of land that is, I think, 4th generation now, and RC and Ania have just decided like we're going to try this regenerative thing and like see what the hell happens. And everyone around them thinks that they're out of their minds because they're doing the conventional stuff, they're on subsidies, they're working with the government closely, they're, you know, using genetically modified whatever, but like they've got crazy water runoff, their soils aren't absorbing any of the water that hits the land. They're working with an insane amount of pesticides and herbicides and things that are killing off bugs and birds and frogs and amphibians and things. So like the biodiversity drops. And because of that, then you have these bare soils that you create this desertification process over time. And we're seeing that all over the world. So if you look at the way that like regenerative ag works and what RC and Ania are doing and what a lot of farmers are starting to do now is like, they're going back to how this was really supposed to function. They're holistically managing the land. They're putting animals on the land. They're rotating them naturally as they would in nature of like if you have a bunch of buffalo out on the plains, there's going to be packs of wolves that are going to come after them. So you're going to have this natural rotation of like large herds of these animals kicking up the dirt, you know, leaving a bunch of cow pies, fertilizing the soil, and then they're going to dig it up and they're going to run away because they're being chased by all of these predators. And that whole process creates, you know, a breakdown of the soil. You break open the soil, you fertilize it, you move all these grasses around. By nature, you're planting all of these different things, and then those animals are moving. And so that land and those grasslands have a chance to regrow. You've got more biodiversity. You know, all of these things are happening. So like one of the cool things that RC and Ania have told us is that like they have bird species that they haven't seen for years that are like on their land now.
That's really cool.
They have like frogs and amphibians and weird things that they haven't seen for years that are back. They've got these, you know, insects they've never seen before. And their soil health and quality is just exponentially increased. And I mean, like, the nutrient density in their meat is like undeniable.
Yeah, it's tested.
It's like amazing.
It certainly seems like the right way to go about the modern problem. The only downside
100%.
being the cost to the end user, which sucks. And I understand people are like, well, what if I can't afford that? And I think it's a great question, and I wonder what your take on that would be.
Yeah, I think that this is like a really challenging thing, especially coming from global public health background, where we're looking at when I was in college, it was like genetically modified foods are the future of the developing world, because we can grow anything in any kind of environment, because these seeds are so indestructible.
They're just super resistant. Crazy
resistant. But we've never looked at the long-term, health implications of these things. I think we're starting to see them chronically in the US of just the crap that we've put since the industrialization era. This is kind of like a separate topic, but you can go back and look at like industrialization era, post-World War II, things that changed in our dietary intake, and the amount of chemicals and crap that we started putting in our food, and like everything chronically, health just plummeted. Yeah. But yeah, I think that from a standpoint of price point, profitability, sustainability, feeding a massive population, a growing population, it's really hard. And the thing that's really challenging is like this model works, like this Carter Country Meats model works, but they're trying to feed their community. Mm-hmm. And like you can ask them. I've had these conversations with these guys, but they're like, look, we're not trying to feed the world. Right. We're not trying to like solve these massive population problems. Like, we're trying to feed our state of Wyoming, and we're trying to feed the state of Colorado and the states around us from this food that we have. And I think that is one of the biggest challenges, is like, we have gone so industrial with everything that we've done, because we're trying to solve these like big world problems, these big nationwide problems, where I think a lot of this stuff, if we were to back up and go a little more grassroots, and more people were like, hey, I'm going to get my meat from Carter Country, and I'm going to like drive to this drop-off point at like the Denver meat locker, and like this is where we get our meat. Instead of the easeability of Instacart, or go to Whole Foods, or go to Sprouts, or wherever you get your meat, and like that's where you're getting things. It's like the whole model has changed since like our grandparents' time. We're so comfortable with the easeability and everything of the modern world that like, it takes extra time to do that. And these farmers and these ranchers that are doing this direct to consumer model, like, they have to play into that game, unfortunately, of direct to your doorstep. And that's what makes it expensive. Yeah. So, it's like all of the packing, the shipping, the delivery, the UPS, like all that crap to get this meat directly to you. If you don't want to drive to the meat locker, if you don't want to like, go to these other places, then it is more expensive. But it doesn't have to be. It just means that the model has to change. So
yeah, and it becomes kind of rough. It has to become more of a priority, right? I think there's I mean, at least for me, it's like I have this trade-off. It's like, okay, do I want to fuel my body with better fuel? What things am I going to have to miss out on in order to do that? And where's the trade-off there? I think, and I guess a point on the industrialization of beef in general, and why it has so much larger of a footprint than we realize. This is why I love listening to vegans, because like, I'm not vegan, but when I hear them, I'm like, oh, that's why they're pissed, because it's really good to hear about it. The percentage of corn and massive fields and agriculture that has to occur and basically deforest the United States in order to feed corn and soy-fed cows, it's way more. Like, you see all those fields, you think they're for feeding humans. They're for feeding...
Yeah, no, it's feed corn.
Yeah, it's just for factories of cows to get churned through so that you can have McDonald's. Yeah. And then you sit back, you're like, oh, now I see why they're pissed.
100%.
I'm like, you don't have... Meat doesn't have to be against non-meat. Like, you can be on the same team, but there's no room for that in social media.
It's crazy. And I think that it's like what I was saying a little bit ago of like, we're arguing about the wrong shit. Like, we need to pull up and out of the weeds a little bit, like, no pun intended. But in my mind, and I think this is kind of what you're getting at, but like, it really is an issue of like regeneration versus industrialization. And I think that common ground, like, I think no matter how the hell you eat, we can all agree that like cow schwitz is not the ideal way to be consuming animal proteins if you're going to be consuming them. Like, it would be this regenerative model that I think even plant-based folks and people who are vegan and vegetarian would say like, I could be okay with that. You know, I still wouldn't do it, but like
Yeah.
this model is ethically, you know, more comfortable for me to stomach.
And I've heard that a lot
But-
from like vegans with the hunting thing. They're like, oh, you like hunting? That sounds
Yeah.
like something I could get behind. Or
Yeah, it's
you know,
different.
it does become an issue of scale though. It's like not everyone can be a hunter, not everyone can have a family farm, and so it's about
Yeah.
making these sustainable I don't know, sources of meat that everyone can have access to. So
Right.
it's definitely a tough problem, and I don't think that
Dude, it
anyone has
is.
a single answer that will solve all of it.
No. Yeah. And this is like, you know, I think you just have to go to like what's going to work for you, right?
Right.
Like we all vote with our dollar 3 times plus a day. And that's like where I reside and have comfort and confidence in my food choices is like we get raw milk from a local dairy farmer. I get my meat from RC and Ania, these 4th generation incredible ranchers. Like I know them. I see them on their horseback, like ripping around and herding their cows and doing all this stuff. It's like I know where a lot of my food is coming from. Like we do veggie CSAs locally when it's in season from local Colorado places out in the springs. Like I think it's so important to get plugged in and know where your food comes from.
Mm-hmm.
And when you do it that way, like there are cheaper options.
Mm-hmm.
Like it is cheaper to do veggie CSAs than it is to go to Whole Foods and buy crap that's like organically grown in Mexico that got shipped over the course of like a month to get here to the state of Colorado where we usually have shipped produce. So I think there's, you know, there's like a model to be worked out. But the unfortunate thing is like most people are not going to take that time, you know, the simplicity of being in the modern world and just like, whatever, I'm going to go to the store and I'm going to do this and it's going to be fine. And I have everything that I need here. Like that's what most people are going to do.
Yeah.
That's how we're hardwired. It's how all of us were raised.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you either, you know, you really have to give a shit. You have to have some sort of like moment that is defining for you in your own life that brings you into this world, or health issues. You know, I think there's a lot of different reasons and avenues as to how people get into
Yeah.
this world of caring. You know, like with you and hunting, like you probably didn't always care about that or weren't as passionate as you are now, but there's
Didn't
probably
grow
something.
up with it even a little bit.
Yeah.
My dad used to serve me steak and then tell me we don't kill animals.
Yeah.
And I was
Seriously?
Yeah, from a very young age. And I was like, what is... He would get mad because we would catch the fish and he would always want to release them. And I would say, well, why don't we eat them? And there was like always this battle there. He's like, we don't kill animals. I'm like, what? We have steak.
Yeah.
But it turned out he had a crazy fear of blood.
Oh, yeah.
And it took, you know, there's this saying by Jordan Peterson, one day your kids are going to figure you out.
Yeah,
And, you know, when
yeah.
you're a kid, you think your parents, everything's great. And
Yeah.
then, like, you start to figure out where your parents' flaws are or, like,
Yeah,
what
they're human too.
completely didn't make sense that they taught you. Like, we don't kill animals, but we eat steak. And
Yeah.
now I look back on that and I'm like, Ryan, you knew better. Like, you
Yeah.
you should have caught on to that one. But, yeah, there's those little things that you catch on to. And
For sure.
on the point of being more intentional and close with your food, one thing that I think is interesting that you would never know unless you go through an experience is that it doesn't only make you feel better internally, but your internal rhythms allow you to be nicer to the other people.
100%.
If your stomach feels terrible all the time and you are feeding your body crap, it is very hard to externally treat people
Yeah.
the way you want to because
You're
you're
not gonna be a happy
constantly
person.
battling these things, anxiety and this pain and all these different things that are going
Yeah.
on in you. It's hard to be the best version of yourself for others,
100%.
which I think is a very underrated and rarely talked about thing that, yes, literally making your diet better will make you a nicer person.
Yeah, literally.
It will make you a nicer person.
It's crazy. Well, and the thing is, like, all these processed foods and crap, you know, obviously have a massive impact on our overall health, but especially microbiome. And, like, gut-brain connection is massive. So, like, you start messing up the microbial balance of your gut. And we have microbiomes all over the place in our eyes, our skin, our sinuses. Like, there's different microbiomes everywhere, but I feel like people are largely just familiar with the gut microbiome because it's, like, you know, such a hot topic over the last decade or so. But like you start to mess up those microbes. Like we have an insane amount of bacteria and microbes in the human body that we have a very synergistic relationship with, but like you start to fuel and feed and offset that ecosystem, it's going to impact your personality. It's going to impact your mood. It's going to impact your ability to show up in the world as the person that you want to show up as.
Yeah.
So yeah, 100% spot on with that.
I've seen a lot of research lately about the amount of your decision making and different things going on in your frontal cortex that are we always believe the brain was in charge of everything, but a lot of like thought processes are now actually connected to what's going on in your stomach.
Yep.
I'm sure that's probably half of your work is studying that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's what's interesting, and like you were just texting me about this, but is like looking at parasitic infections and parasites.
Oh yeah,
and
we need to get into
impacts.
that. I need to. This is for me. You guys can stop listening if you want. This is a selfish point of the podcast where I need to figure out what I got.
Yeah, no, parasites are huge, man. Parasites are a big deal. I think it's like it makes people squirm, right? Like I guarantee you there's people that are like, parasites, what? I might have them, like freaking out even just hearing that. Like, yes, they exist. You know, unless like we deworm our dogs, we deworm our cats, we deworm large animals. Like go to any farm. They have an insane amount of deworming medications that they're giving their animals.
My friend's mother does like dog boarding, and she came up to me seeing that I was like drinking a lot of questionable water on my walkabouts and whatnot.
Dude, you're loaded.
And she was like, "I'm gonna make you take dewormer," and I'm like, "Really?"
Yeah.
She's like, "Yeah, you need to." So, I don't know. Is this true? Like, if you had to guess, do I have worms?
We all have parasites.
Okay, so we
like
all
if you have a pulse, you have a parasite.
Okay, word.
Guaranteed.
That makes me feel better.
Now
I'm
we
listening.
all have them. I mean, think about it. Like think about, and it's like a funny thing, right? Like it's taken me a while to get to this mindset where I'm like, duh, of course this is how it is. But like we as humans think that we are above essentially everything, right? Like we think we're smarter, we think we're better than like everything that exists in the world. We think we're
separate from nature.
Yes, like we think we're this totally separate entity that just dominates everything, and we do dominate everything, but we're not outside the bounds of nature. We're not outside the bounds of our biological and physiological beings. Like we are prone to, you know, we're going to die. Everyone's going to die one day. Like we're not outside all of these things. So it's funny to me, and I think it's only natural to squirm thinking about parasites because it's an uncomfortable, odd thought. But the reality is like we are constantly in contact with different bacteria and microbes and toxins and things that are getting into the human body. It's what the immune system is there for. And I do think there's an element of a synergistic relationship with parasites in the human body, just in general, like based historically on research, and like we can get into that in a second. And I see this in my own practice too, of like people dealing with, you know, heavy metals, environmental toxins, Lyme disease, and mold. Like parasites hold up to 6 times their body weight in all of those things. So there's an element of parasites, I think, being protective to some extent, but it's when they start to proliferate and take over and throw off immune function and balance that it becomes an issue. So, you know, are these parasites a problem for everyone? Probably not. But as soon as a parasitic infection starts to tip the scales on like your, you know, T1 and T2 helper cells of your immune function, you're going to have an issue.
What your T1?
So T1 and T2 are just, you know, your helper T1 cells and your helper T2 cells. Your immune system is, you know, very complex, but there's a large element of immune function that's a balance of these T1 and T2 cells. So helper T1 cells are largely focused on acute illness, acute infection, cold, parasitic infections, things like that. Helper T2 cells are largely largely focused on supporting more chronic infections. So like if you have a retrovirus, it keeps that at bay. If you have some sort of chronic illness, it helps keep that at bay. So we kind of have like this acute and chronic balance of T1 and T2 cells. Okay. So like one of the biggest things that I see with parasitic infections with our clients that are dealing with more complex chronic inflammatory stealth illness, like, you know, ongoing IBS, ongoing Crohn's, ongoing mold illness, Lyme disease, co-infections, things like that. Like we have to hit parasites with these people because parasites are usually taking up so much of the T1 cells that like this scale gets completely out of balance, where like the body and immune function is so focused on T1 and acute issues that T2 function drops, and then you see these acute, you know, chronic, long-standing issues just like through the roof.
So could you cure something like Crohn's with just diet and lifestyle and all that sort of stuff, or is that one that would require, you know, the traditional Western medicine? What's like the best thing on a serious digestive issue like that?
So this is a tricky question because I'm
Am I
not a
getting
doctor.
you in trouble?
I mean, I'm very comfortable talking about these things, and like we have disclaimers and legalities and shit covered, but like I'm not a doctor. I don't diagnose or treat disease. I legally cannot say that I cure anyone. People that I work with are my clients, they're not my patients. So there's all these things. So like I'm just gonna correct you there for a moment of like cure. Like I cannot say that. A doctor could say that.
Could you consult effectively with
Yes,
someone that
very effectively.
Okay.
So when we look at something like, Crohn's or IBS or, these more complex issues, it's rooted under the same, umbrella as anything that's going to cause some sort of chronic inflammatory disease. Like when you break it down and you look at illness and you look at the tens, if not hundreds of thousands of diagnoses that you could possibly have and plethora of symptoms, if you root it all back up and look at the big umbrella that's creating that, it's really only a few things that are driving illness and driving disease states and driving dysfunction and symptoms. And a lot of that is focused on immune dysregulation, metabolic issues, and stress. Like these are like the three biggest things. And like what's driving that immune dysregulation? Could be parasites, could be environmental toxins, could be stress related. Metabolism stuff. Like obviously we all know how big metabolic disease is, metabolic syndrome, people with diabetes, cardiovascular disease, all these dietary metabolic related things. So like it's really not that confusing. And I think that's one thing that I love about the work that I do is like we'll get people who are like, I've been to 5 doctors, no one can tell me what's wrong. I've been diagnosed with 20 things. Can you help me? And I'm like, yeah, we can help you. Like what you have going on is probably not this complex. Like these are all symptoms.
Yeah.
You don't have
So they're
20...
treating the symptoms rather than the root cause.
Right. And so then it becomes this diagnosis, slap on a med, another diagnosis, slap on another med. Then you have all these drug interactions. And
then
all
those
of these
drug interactions are probably causing a lot of issues
Right.
on their own.
100%. Well, and all meds, essentially every medication downregulates mitochondrial function. It creates an insane amount of nutrient deficiencies. So like if we're losing cofactors and we're losing energy and we're losing ATP, like you're just slowly shutting systems down in the body.
Sure.
So like meds, and this is just my opinion, but meds long term do a lot more damage. Maybe they're going to increase your lifespan, but they're not increasing your health span.
Yeah.
You're not getting to the root of why you have MS or why you have IBS or, some of these complex things. So
I want to dig into the parasites for a second.
Shoot, I'm ready.
So,
what questions do you have?
One thing you said a minute ago, which I want to touch on, you said like it can be like a mutually beneficial relationship, like a symbiosis. Like I'm the shark and the parasite's that little fish that swims under his fin. And like he cleans me off and I keep him protected. Yeah. That's what you're talking about. Yeah. Like in my body right now, there's parasites and I keep him safe and he's like helping me out in there.
I do think that there's, yes. So there is some new research that's coming out about this. I think it makes biological sense that this would be an element of parasites. Like we've, evolutionarily speaking, grown up with these microbes and these parasites and all of these things like since the beginning of time. So, kind of looking back at that comment that I made that parasites hold up to 6 times their body weight in heavy metals, environmental toxins, pesticides, herbicides, plastics, like parasites hold on to an insane amount of things and they gobble them up. So like I have like so many thoughts about this. I'm trying to organize my thoughts here on all the parasite stuff, but like if we get a client who like we've hit parasite cleansing, we know they have an issue, we pull their blood labs, and their blood markers are just flaring with a parasite infection, and we hit parasites for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, and they're still passing an insane amount of parasites. It's really clear to me that parasites are not the issue. Parasites are there for a reason and they're cleaning something up. So all of these pathogens and toxins have a relationship with one another where a lot of people think, oh, parasites are the root cause. It's what's throwing my immune system off. Like it's really just a piece of the puzzle. So, the element of symbiosis, yes, for sure. But when do the scales tip? And if you have so many pathogens and toxins in your body that are attracting these parasites, that these parasites are repopulating like bunny rabbits inside of your body and destroying your immune function and creating, opening all these doors for chronic illness in a bunch of different ways, we of course have to hit the parasites, but like, why are they overpopulating so much? So I think this, I get asked all the time on Instagram and from clients and stuff like that, like, are parasites bad? Like, am I trying to hit absolute zero? And no, you don't want to hit absolute zero. And like, even if you wanted to, you're not going to, because you're going to go walk around outside barefoot. You're going to let your dog kiss your face. You're going to go swim in a stream in the middle of the summer with your friends. You're going to drink out of that stream when you're on a survival trip. Like, you're going to live and you're going to come into contact with the natural world and you're going to be exposed to parasites. So my approach with clients is like, let's get the infection under control if there is one. Let's try to understand why there was an infection and address those other things if needed. And then do full moon cleanses 1 to 2 times a year, because you're just going to be exposed to them. So in the same way that you would deworm your dog or you would deworm large animals if you're a farmer, why don't we deworm ourselves? Like, like your friend, like, honestly, it's 100% worth doing, because you're setting yourself up to be preventative towards like creating some sort of immune dysregulation and potential issue in the future if these parasites do overpopulate and just, wreak havoc on the body.
When you say passing a parasite, are we talking pee-pee caca? Or what are we talking about here?
Yeah,
How they crawl out your skin?
So, it depends, right? Like the guinea worm, like this was something actually in Bangladesh that I saw was crazy. This doesn't happen to people in the U.S. very often, so just throw that out there, and then we'll get into like common stuff that I see with clients.
Oh,
but, like,
did it come out of her eye?
No,
Okay.
that's happened before, but it's common they come out of the feet through the skin.
Oh!
So if you've ever seen this is, everyone's familiar with this, and you're going to be like, oh, no way. On every ambulance, there's like that cross with like the worm thing around it.
I thought it was a snake. Is that a worm?
Check it out. It's actually how in developing countries they would get guinea worm out of people's feet, because they'll start to kind of come out, but it needs something to crawl out on. So a lot of people in developing countries will like put a stick there to get the parasite to crawl out of the skin. Fun little tip.
That's rad.
Super crazy. But no, so that's not like very common in the US. I'm sure it happens to some people, but like,
You could be like at work and then like a worm comes out into your shoe. Is that what we're talking about here?
so I don't think it happens like that usually, but maybe. I'm
Okay.
sure it's happened before to people. But the bulk of, so like, I think a lot of people are hearing me talk about parasites. You guys are probably thinking the same thing, and you're like, oh my God, worms, like craziness. They're going to be alive coming out of me.
Yeah.
That's not how this happens.
Oh, okay.
And they don't just like crawl out by themselves. Like, they do come out with your bowel movements. The protocols that we put clients on, we're killing them. So we are using multiple different products. First thing you have to do is like open and support drainage detoxification pathways, because if we start to just like jump in and push parasites out right away, you're gonna feel like absolute shit. So anyone listening to this, don't do parasite cleanse by yourself. You should work with someone, because you have to make sure those drainage and detoxification pathways are open and functioning well, because as we mentioned, parasites can hold up to 6 times their body weight of all this crap, and when you kill them and they die, they release all these things.
Ooh.
So we use binders in our practice to bind to all of these toxins. We use certain herbs and seeds and things that help to essentially trap parasites. And there's not just worm and helminth-based parasites. There's amoebas, there's, these microbial-based parasites you can't see with the naked eye. Those forms usually cause more of diarrhea. So it kind of depends on your symptoms and stuff and blood work of like what we'll target. But we use pretty broad reaching herbals that'll kind of hit everything. But the bulk of our clients usually start to see parasites like once we get to that point after we hit drainage for a month and we jump into genuine parasite cleansing. Once you start taking those herbs, probably within like 1 to 3 days, like you'll start passing parasites.
And you can see them.
You can see them. Some people, you have to dig a little bit. Things get a little grody. So if you're like...
You like sell them a poopy
comfortable.
stick with the pack so that they can dig around in there? I'm curious.
I don't sell the poopy sticks, but like
You just
you
go to
can
their backyard.
go buy kebabs. Some people buy
kebabs.
like
Okay.
pipe cleaners and shit like that because they kind of
Stick.
get grabby. Stick, whatever you want to do.
They
but
get
literally,
grabby?
like,
You mean
if
the worm gets grabby?
No, I mean like the pipe cleaner will kind of like
Oh.
you can kind of grab onto things a little bit better
Okay,
with
I
that
hear.
versus just like a stick.
Gotcha.
Like things will just kind of like break apart and slough off if you're using like a stick or a kebab. But yeah, I mean, they're dead. You'll feel them die. Like that's kind of the craziest thing is like and I've parasite cleansed a bunch. I had to
Feel them die?
So because parasites release all these toxins, people usually get a wave of symptoms. So the most common thing I see is people will get like a wave of anxiety, or they'll be like really wound up and on edge, and nervous system and overdrive for like a day or so. And then like a day later, hours later, they'll have like crazy stomach cramping, and then like have urge to go to the bathroom and pass parasites.
Whoa, my life is changing right now. I am learning a lot. I'm trying to figure out if this is something I want to do, or if now I'm scared of doing it.
It's a little scary the first time. I mean, I'll be honest, the first time that I ever like dug parasites out of my bowel movements, I was like shaking. Like my hands were like shaking.
What kind of herbs
crazy.
are you using? Like,
Yeah.
Are these things you grow at home, or you buy packets?
I mean, you could, but I work with a company called Cellcore Biosciences. They're these incredible doctors that were running into these roadblocks with their clients, and then they realized like we're missing all of this, all of these different elements. Dude went to India, blah blah blah. The story goes on. Now they have this incredible supplement line,
like a holistic
based supplement line.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And so the parasitic herbs that I use largely, Mimosa pudica seed is the biggest one. That's Cellcore's Para 1 product. And Mimosa pudica is like a flowering herb that's pretty big in like Indian culture and Middle Eastern culture, but a lot of people use like the whole plant. Not a lot of people are familiar with using the seed. So the seed has an extremely like thick, viscous type of like gel that it will make. It's kind of like chia seeds. If you grind up chia seeds or flax seeds, throw it in water, it'll create like that big gel. But with Mimosa pudica seed, the way that it works in the gastrointestinal system, it is essentially is like scrubbing the gut. So Mimosa pudica is one of the biggest ones that we use that essentially kind of traps parasites and helps to slough off any type of biofilm, bacteria, anything that's kind of covering it. Biofilm is like a whole other thing that if you want me to talk about, I can, but it's something that like protects parasites and bacteria from being seen from the immune system. So we usually do some biofilm busting and breaking that down before we can actually get in and get rid of parasites, depending upon how severe the parasitic infection is that we're dealing with. But Mimosa pudica is a really big one. We use that with pretty much everyone. And then we use another blend that has like black walnut and a bunch of other different types of like pretty typical anti-parasitic herbals. But the bulk of these products are just anti-parasitic herbal blends. Some of them are capsules, some of them are tinctures. The great thing about these is you can titrate up or titrate down. You can open up some of the capsules. The Mimosa pudica you don't want to because it creates that gel and it's like truly terrible to ingest not in a capsule form.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there's like a whole extremely effective process that we follow.
For your clients, what percentage are men versus women?
We're probably like 80-20.
Okay.
We get a lot of the men that we work with are actually husbands or significant others of the women that we work with.
Yeah,
and like
they see it and they get like
exactly.
introduced to it and they're like, maybe I could try that.
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
it feels like, and Lauren and I joke about this all the time, which is every single female that we know has stomach problems. Like we don't, every woman I run into, there's a story and this chronology of their stomach getting worse and better, or they just have chronic stomach problems. Everyone has a story, but I feel like guys don't talk about it as much.
Oh, they do.
They do.
They
okay.
do.
So maybe just not my guy friends.
I mean, I don't
open
think it's like
the
a common thing to talk about. I mean, there's a whole other part of this stuff too is like emotional health. Like I have yet to work with someone who has chronic inflammatory illness that doesn't have some sense of feelings of abandonment in their life to some extent. Like there's massive connections of emotions. This is going to sound kind of woo and fucking crazy, but like we store our emotions in our organs.
Yeah.
And, stomach especially is a lot of like anxiety, fear. There's a lot of discomfort that can sit in the stomach. And if you think about emotions, it's like energy in motion in the body. And if we're not dealing with and clearing those things out, they're going to get stuck somewhere.
Sure.
And they often get stuck in specific organ systems. So like I see a lot of gastro issues with like anxiety, fear, not feeling approved of in some kind of way, which is very common for women. Liver, gallbladder health, and any stagnation there. I see a ton of anger, resentment, irritability. And it's kind of fun, like when you get to this point of like where I'm at in my career, because we'll have clients go through like parasite cleansing. Like, you want to talk about emotional clearing. Like, holy shit, people have crazy emotional clearing and like mental clarity after going through parasite cleansing. But we'll get a lot of people that have liver flukes, which is like a type of parasite, and they often will attach to the liver, hence the name. They can get stuck in the common bile duct, like liver bile duct.
Yeah.
And we'll have clients pass like crazy amounts of liver flukes, but they will be like in rage mode, like the day before they pass a ton of liver flukes.
It's so weird that we
Just
think about the
insane.
mind and body being like completely separate. Like all this
It's
happens.
part of the body.
This happens in my mind, and
Yeah.
like my body's a whole separate thing. It's like, no, it's all connected.
Yeah.
It's just
like your brain is an organ.
Yeah, I think it was
Yeah.
I just can't remember who it was. Sam something, the guy that talks about consciousness a lot, but he like talks about how humans always imagine themselves kind of up here by the eyes and looking out, like our consciousness is up here. We forget that it's kind of everywhere, like just as much, just because this is an organ, these are all organs too.
100%.
And it's kind of weird that we always imagine them separately because we picture ourselves to be up here.
Yeah.
And then this kind of attached to us.
Right. Yeah. Well, and especially if you're someone who's in your head a lot, it can feel like you literally live like from the neck up. Like there's a lot of people who we get that are like very sick and dealing with a lot of different mental health issues because of expressions of whether it's parasites, Lyme, whatever, these like neurodegenerative types of things that create a lot of neuroinflammation where they're just like cycling in their heads all day and like they're not in their body. Like they just are not connected to that part of themselves, which is wild.
Are autoimmune diseases more common now, or are we just recognizing more?
They're
of
more
them?
common now.
Really? Than ever
I'm going to be
before?
bold. That's my opinion.
Okay.
Research,
No, I like it.
Research is really wishy-washy about this stuff.
Okay.
But I feel like you can say that about everything. You could be like, oh, like, depression is more common now because we're reporting it more and we're talking about it more. Like, like from a critical thinking standpoint on all of these things, it's like, again, kind of going back to that chart of graphing of looking at our health from like, you know, World War II to now, you look at the crap that is in our food system and the way that it's impacting our health. Like we are way more sick now than we were in our grandparents' generation. You look at the rate of childhood cancer, you look at the rate of childhood autoimmune illnesses, like kids coming out the womb with insane illnesses. Like meningitis is different, it's communicable. But like these chronic illnesses, like children with diabetes, like type 1 diabetes was never a thing that children had back in our grandparents' age.
Wow.
It was very rare, if at all. So like we look at these things and like in my mind, this is really an issue of toxic burden over time. So a lot of people don't know this, but you can pass your toxicity that your body has been exposed to your child in utero.
Sure. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense to me.
100%. But we don't think about that. So if you think about like the generational toxicity that's been passed down of like, you know, my grandfather was sprayed with DDT because that was like the healthy thing to do when he was growing up, which we know now is like a load of crap.
Roundup.
Yeah. Like, holy crap. Or like all the stuff in our food system, or like if your mother had mercury filling, she can pass up to 2/3 of that mercury heavy metal to you, which is massive neuroinflammatory, contributes to all sorts of different illnesses and ADD and ADHD and Alzheimer's and cancer, crazy amount of stuff. So like you logically and critically think about this stuff and how like the modern world has just exponentially increased since that time. Like, of course, these things are coming in at higher rates. That's my thought. Science will say, like, if you Google this, it's like, oh, but I don't know.
Is
like,
that what it
no
sounds
shit.
like?
It's exactly what it says.
I just feel like there might be a little bit of both. Like I think it's probably some things are more common now, and some things are just reported more commonly
For
now.
sure.
I think there's probably points where you could pick and choose, and
There's some nuance there.
There's certainly things that are caused by microplastics are definitely more common now than they were 100 years ago.
Right, because you didn't have them.
Exactly. So I think like lifestyle things where you can pinpoint, that's a very easy one for me to cherry pick. I'm sure there's a lot of other environmental factors that cause certain diseases to be more prevalent versus just more commonly reported.
For sure.
And Lyme disease is one I'm curious about because it's certainly growing exponentially in like the awareness, at least in the Western world. But like I think when my grandparents were around, I don't think people talked about Lyme disease. And my understanding is partially that's because it's hard to test. It's a combination of 3 specific proteins in the blood, and it's a little bit more intensive than testing for the cold or things like that. So maybe they
Yeah.
weren't testing back then. But now, I mean, I know at least 10 people, I would say comfortably 10, maybe 20, that have Lyme disease or have had a bout with Lyme disease.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's a lot of people. And that's a very serious, life-changing moment.
Yeah.
I wonder how common it is now
It's extremely
overall.
common. I think that, I mean, I probably have an odd thought and opinion on this because this is like a lot of our clients have Lyme. But yeah, Lyme is extremely hard to test for because it can lay dormant. Even though it is bacterial in nature, it does function very similar to a retroviral type of thing. So like a cold sore, herpes simplex virus 1 is a retroviral thing where like it's going to manifest itself when the immune system is, tanked. So even though Lyme is not, viral in nature, it's bacterial, it functions in a similar type of manner where like when the immune system is dysregulated and tanked, Lyme will flare like crazy. So this is where like a lot of people are like, yeah, I kind of always felt kind of sick and I don't know. And then like my health absolutely tanked. We couldn't figure out what it was. I got diagnosed with MS and this, and that. And then I found out I had Lyme. So it's usually, and a lot of people are misdiagnosed. Like anytime I get a client who comes to me who's like, I have MS, I'm like, no, you have Lyme. Like you have a Lyme issue. And we've seen MS, RA, all sorts of autoimmune markers like completely drop as soon as we address drainage, parasites, mold, Lyme and co-infections, and we re-regulate the immune system so that it can actually put this stuff at bay. Like in my opinion, we're essentially working to put these things into remission, and it's absolutely possible. The conventional medical model is very much rooted in like, this is bacterial and we're going to drill it with antibiotics. And the unfortunate thing about antibiotics, although there is a benefit sometimes for them, just like we talked about you with meningitis, antibiotics literally stand for like anti-life, like anti against biotics, bio life, like you're killing everything.
Yeah.
So you're wiping everything out. So not only are you like knocking out Lyme bacteria, but you're killing everything off. And the
Scary.
tricky thing with Lyme is that it can do something called pleomorph, which this is another thing that I feel like a lot of people are not familiar with when it comes to looking at Lyme is pleomorphism is the ability for bacteria or a pathogen to change its shape, structure, and function. So it can literally change into a different type of bacteria, which is what makes Lyme really hard to test for. If you're not
Gotcha.
actively flaring and in absolute dog shit symptoms with Lyme, you're not going to get a positive test. And Western blot, I think, is, definitely the most common test that people are familiar with. But there's other tests from like IGeneX, DNA-based, or a little bit more specific, but they still don't hit the nail on the head. So I oftentimes will run bioenergetic testing where we're literally looking at like the frequency of Lyme and is it showing up in your body? And that's when we'll address things. So like I have Lyme, but I've never had it manifest to the extent of like that I would think I would get a positive test from like Western blot or IGeneX or like some of these other more DNA-based, high standard of like where you'd get a diagnosis of Lyme. Like I don't think I'd ever be diagnosed as Lyme, but I had all the symptoms for a bunch of different Lyme bacteria and co-infections. It's really common to go hand in hand with mold. And as soon as I like hit mold detox and parasites, I had a bunch of Lyme symptoms that came up, but they were pretty mild. Ran a bioenergetic test, came back with Borrelia, Babesia, Mycoplasma, Rickettsia, like Rocky Mountain spotted fever. I had like a bunch of weird co-infections and things that came up. Did a homeopathic series therapy, which essentially trains the immune system to manage this bacteria better. And like I don't have any patterns or frequency of Lyme in my body anymore.
Wow.
So, but I would think that like if you take me and I, eat standard American diet, treat my body like shit, keep living in mold, I can almost guarantee you I would be like stage 4 Lyme in a couple years.
Wow.
So
So-
it just depends.
Are you going to pass that to the little one then?
It's actually the entire reason why Stu and I, after we miscarried and we found out about mold and I like went down this whole health journey and I found out that I had Lyme, I was like, I have to get this shit into remission completely before we get pregnant because you can pass Lyme in utero.
That's what I was
But
wondering.
usually only when it's active. So like if you're actively flaring and you have Lyme, that's when it's most likely, based on like the most recent research.
Wow.
My kid could still have it. I have no idea.
But it just like puts into perspective how important the decisions you make are. Maybe not just lying, but like all the decisions you make as a pregnant mother must be
100%
really important. And those are things that probably folks didn't know until recently.
I mean, preconception is massive. Like, we're creating programs around preconception right now to help people get educated on like what are things you need to do before you start genuinely considering reproducing and having children, so that your kids can be healthy, so you can have a healthy pregnancy, so you can feel good for you and your partner. A lot of, fertility and preconception, I think, is focused on the woman, but like men are 50% of the picture here. Like, they supply the sperm, and how many issues do we have with sperm and testosterone and fertility on both sides? Like, they're both important. So,
Sure.
And it's not just, I think preconception and fertility is important for everyone, whether you want kids or not, because your fertility and your libido and your hormone cycles and fluctuations are like one of your vital signs as a person. Like, if you are not healthy, happy, and horny, something's wrong. Like, if you don't have a libido, you're likely in survival mode at some capacity. Something's out of whack.
Yeah.
So
makes sense. It's interesting hearing your perspective, because from a health professional, it's so much more naturalistic. I feel like your ideas, most of them, I'm drawing a connection back to like some principle of nature.
Yeah.
And is that like the pitch? Like, when somebody is coming to you as a professional, you're not a doctor, as a professional, are they looking for a more naturalistic way, or what's the inclination?
Yeah, I mean, not necessarily. I would say the bulk of the people who come to us are pissed, and they're like, they're just pissed at their situation. Like, they feel like shit. They've been to an insane amount of doctors who run their labs and their blood work and say everything's normal, everything looks great, and they still feel like hell. And maybe they believe that for a year, and they're like, everything's normal, okay, cool, I'm gonna like get over this. And then they go to maybe an acupuncturist, then maybe they go to whoever they go to next. And, there's definitely like a craft and an art and a science to the work that I do. And it's listening to people. It's looking at labs from a functional standpoint, looking at different reference ranges, because I'm looking for optimal health, not the average population. That's what conventional blood markers are, is you're looking at research from generations of the average population of what healthy looks like.
I never thought to question the reference intervals.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
Everything.
Yeah.
So,
I'm learning that.
Yeah, I mean, it is largely focused in nature what we do, but again, like, most people aren't like, hey, I'm like really natural and I would love to like jump into your approach here because we agree on these things. Like, a lot of people are like, I don't know what the fuck you do. I don't know what the letters behind your name mean, but like, you have a ton of incredible success, and like, my best friend referred me, and I'm so sick of dealing with Crohn's and being on meds, and I've been to 10 doctors and no one can tell me what's wrong. And I'm like, sweet, cool. This is what we do. Let's run some labs.
So it's
like,
not a bunch of long-haired bush hippies like, oh,
no,
you're the lady that stares at the sun.
No, I actually get a lot of like pretty well-to-do people that are just like, they're just fucking people who feel like shit and want to feel better and like live their life. And I think that's like where the bulk of my passion comes from, is in all the life chapters that I've been through. Like, I know what it feels like to be held back, to have your mental health be like total dog shit, to not feel like yourself, to not have the energy to go hike and snowboard or go lift as much as I want, or like do whatever I want to do and live out my purpose and have a ton of energy to show up for other people. And I think because I understand that and I've been through those things, I'm like, I don't want anyone to have to deal with that if they don't have to.
Yeah.
And you don't have to. There's a way out. There's a way to figure that out. There's a way to get the body back in balance, and the body is not stupid.
Give me 3 tips that involve no money, that if you're listening to this and you're like not feeling optimal, where are the first 3 places you would start?
Yeah, I mean, number one, there's so many good things. And there's a lot of really good free things. We'll see where my talking goes, but there might be a slightly more than 3. But I feel like the biggest one is like, just get outside. Like, get outside. We're hardwired to live in the natural world. So many of us, like, I know you guys totally agree with this stuff and talk about it on the podcast a lot, but like, we're in rubber shoes, we're in synthetic fluorescent lights, we're staring at phones. The lighting that we get that comes in from our phones and screens and all sorts of things and lights and doors is not the same lumen is what you're getting from the sun. There is something biologically hardwired in all of us of our circadian rhythm and our mood and our energy and our sleep cycles and our hormone cycles that are set with the sun and with nature. So get outside, get your feet on the ground, take your rubber shoes off, get into the sunlight. You don't need to stare into the sun, but just like even on a cloudy day, the amount of lumen that you're getting from the sun on a cloudy day is more than from your cell phone or lights indoors. You need to get outside. You need to get light into your retina. It will set so many things up. So kind of like two things in one there, but definitely get outside. Community is huge. I think this is another thing that a lot of people don't talk about in health, but if you look at any population of the world that is, has crazy amounts of longevity, they have strong connections to community. They have strong human relationships, long-standing relationships with people that mean something to them, whether that's family, whether that's friends. Like, build community somehow that you're connected with, where you feel loved, supported, seen, heard, validated. Seek that out. Be very intentional about that. That has massive implications on our stress, on our health, on so many things. So get outside, build some good connections. I would say like third and most basic is just make sure you're drinking enough water. And make sure you're getting minerals in that water. I think a lot of people think that, in order to be hydrated, I just need to slam a ton of water. Like, minerals are actually what's going to hydrate your cells. At the edge of every cell, we have sodium potassium pumps, and these sodium potassium pumps are essentially what regulate if the cell is going to actually absorb water or just let the water kind of go by the cell. So when we think about hydration, we really need to be thinking about cellular hydration.
Sodium, magnesium.
Yes, potassium, all of those things, chloride. And one of the easiest ways to do this, very cheap and easy way, I know you said free, so this is like kind of free, is getting like Himalaya salt or Redmond's real salt, a mineral salt, not iodized table salt. That stuff is absolute crap. But just take a pinch of salt and put it in every glass of water. You don't have to buy crazy fancy minerals. I do because I fucking love them. They make me feel great. But like, buy some high quality salt from the store that's like $5-10 and put a pinch in every glass of water. And
I carry
you'll
a
notice
rock.
the difference.
Like, how like the
we still
pink
have
crystals.
those.
You have you had it from the.
They're like sitting in our kitchens. My husband like licks them all the time.
Yeah, they're great.
We still have them.
And it's funny. I was listening to Huberman the other day because I was thinking about this, and they were talking about salt dosing. Him and Andy Galpin, because I mean, it's massive for endurance sports.
100%.
I'm always interested in what they say for dosing, because some people say you need thousands of milligrams, and some people say you should be mixing it intermittently. And he was saying one of the best ways to test salt is by taste. And I'm like, when I'm done with a double 14er and a long day, I will I'll have a piece of salt and I'll lick it, and then eventually it'll no longer taste good to me, and then I put it away.
That's how minerals work.
It's just like perfect. Like, my body's like, two more licks, one more lick, you're done. And then I have no urge for salt, and I feel like I just ate a 3-course meal. Like, I have enough energy to do anything. It's an incredible thing, like the intuition of listening to your body. And to hear a scientist say, rather than dosing,
just go by taste.
Just go by taste.
Yeah.
And he says the same thing with thirst. He's like, one of the best ways to gauge your thirst is like, if you're drinking water and it's like, oh, wow, that was so good. He's like, you're dehydrated. Yeah. It's like that meaning is that your body is craving more water. You shouldn't be taking a sip of water and be like, oh, thank God. That means you're dehydrated.
Right. And it's like, again, nature is smarter than science. Like, our bodies are not stupid. And you think about like salt licks out for animals. It's like, they're going to come, they're going to lick as much salt as they want, and then they're going to get the hell out of there. Yep. There's actually a tincture that we use with clients who have like pretty out of whack minerals. And it's like 5 to 8 different minerals in small bottles, and you just go by taste. However many drops you need, and then that's like your supplementation. That's pretty cool. It's pretty sweet. But yeah, that's how minerals are. Like, we used to do a zinc taste test too. People who are deficient in zinc, a lot of people are. But if you like take a zinc supplement and swish it around in your mouth and it tastes like fuzzy and gross and disgusting, like, you're probably set. Probably don't need it. But some people who are deficient, it'll taste really sweet. See, I like that. It's like the taste of minerals will change depending upon your deficiency or sufficiency of that mineral. I like the idea that the body knows best. Like, something about that feels right. Right. It's like as intended. Yeah. It makes too much sense. That's the thing, is it makes too much sense.
the other one you said that I resonated with was community.
Yeah.
Because I've had points in my life where I've been relatively nomadic, not really talking to any people, whether it's out in the bush or whatever. And no matter how healthy and how much time I'm spending doing what I love, I never feel whole unless I have community. And like literally my favorite thing to do is to move my body and be in the bush. But if I'm only doing that alone, you can never feel complete on your own. Mm-hmm. There's like a saying that a lone primate is a dead primate.
Yeah.
In nature. So
that's true. I mean, we're tribal, right? Like you look back at, what's that book? I forget who wrote this, but it's called Sapiens, and it's like the history of human evolution. Mm-hmm. And like we're hardwired for 100 deep, close connections. Anything more than that is overwhelming for us. Which I think is part of the reason why the massive, intertwined lives across the entire world on social media is unbelievably stressful.
Yep.
Because we're not hardwired for it. But, even if you're incredibly introverted or you're wildly extroverted, being deeply connected to other people, like we are 1,000% hardwired for that.
That's one of the best things about the pod is just coming in and sitting down and talking with a friend for a while.
Hang out with people, yeah.
It's like, you don't have to be messaging on your phone and like staring at it and imagining what their facial expressions are like. You're like, oh,
well, you miss that, right? Like, especially, I've been on Instagram utilizing that platform to leverage business for the last 6 to 7 years. And like Stu, my husband, and I have this saying that social media breeds mass intimacy, which is a 100% oxymoron because intimacy means intimacy. It means usually with one other person or a small group of people sharing something very important to you and very intimate. And when you think about human communication and body language, and like if I'm going to sit down and I'm going to share something that is like tearing me apart, or I'm super embarrassed about it, or something that I need to be vulnerable about and deeply loved for, whatever it is, like I want to be looked in the eye, I want to be held, I want someone to like turn their head to the side, come hug me afterwards. Like there's all these different human cues that I think social media has really completely fucked us mentally. And there's tons of studies and research on this. It's like no surprise that like when you share these very intimate things that we're used to having intimacy around, but you share it to the masses, it's like you get that dopamine kick of getting it off your back, but you receive nothing. And like maybe you get these like, few messages, but it is not the same thing as sitting down with someone else. There's a massive energy exchange. There's body language exchange. You can't replace that. So, that's like another huge element of community is like social media does not count as your community connection. Like it needs to be real and in person.
In person. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The last two things I want to dig into, and you can just take them or leave them and tell me. I want quick answers and these are, again, the reason I have this podcast is because I'm selfish and I want to talk to people that I want to talk to and ask them the questions that I want to hear.
Yeah.
And so these are those questions.
I'm so curious.
Yeah, I just had to preface that. This isn't for anyone listening. This is for me. Where do you stand on tap water?
It's absolute trash. No one should drink tap water.
Really? What's the solution?
You've got to filter your water. Lauren's freaking out. Did I just drop a bomb in here?
We be drinking tap water sometimes.
Ooh, don't do it.
Well, I drink a lot of coconut water.
Yeah, coconut water is great.
I love coconut water.
Tap water is just trash. I'll have to send you a handful of things.
We have a filter.
Yeah, filter. It depends on what it's filtering, right?
I don't know the answer.
Yeah, it's worth looking into. I'm a big fan of Greenfield Water Solutions. It's where we get our water filtration system from. Zach Greenfield, I can give you his number. He's like the shit.
Okay.
But yeah, tap water is truly trash. You get an ungodly amount of things in there. Like we have water treatment centers and stuff, of course, but like we chlorinate the crap out of our water. We fluoridate the crap out of our water. Iodine, like, and they're all synthetic forms of nutrients. Like we've already talked about this. So it's like, how beneficial is that? Not that beneficial. But we're also getting a bunch of other crap, like antibiotics, like COVID was found in the water, and it's like, who's to say where the fuck that came from? Is it coming out of people's bodies? Did it like somehow get into the water supply? Like, not to be a conspiracy theorist, but it's like you critically think about some of these things, and it's like water supply is a really big deal. And you look at water in any other country, And it's like artesian wells and water that's coming down that is structured because it's run through these, channels of rocks that are charged, to a certain frequency that structures literally the shape of the water. I don't know if you've ever looked at research around, oh shit, there's a book, I can't think of the name of it. It's called The Shape of Water.
I've looked at
And
some
it's
studies like
crazy.
you can change the makeup of water by yelling at it.
Yeah, or even setting the intention.
Or
Setting the
thinking,
intention of like, if I'm thinking in my mind, like, I love you, I love you, I love you. Like the water structure and crystals will look different.
It's interesting
It's
because there's some
crazy.
old like coyote teachers that say a similar thing about fire, that you can change a fire's course and build and IBUs based on your thoughts and things you say to it. And I've always thought it was like just too hocus pocus for me. Like I'm pretty woo woo about some things and others less, but that one I was like, I'm gonna leave that one where it stands. And now after reading these water studies where it's like if I yell at water and it changes, and you can literally set up science to monitor that. Now I'm like, all right, well, if I can yell at water and change it, I guess yelling at fire probably changes it too.
Yeah.
And
I mean, it's quantum physics, right? Like, and we're what, like 70-80% water?
Yeah.
Just like think about
Whoa.
the impact that thoughts have, the people that you spend your time around, the music
Getting yelled at?
that you listen to, getting yelled at,
Or getting patted
what
on the
people
back.
say to you. It's massive.
Wow.
Change your fucking life.
That is pretty incredible.
It's cool because we're starting to actually have like cold hard evidence of these things.
Yeah.
But
And, dumb people like me need that, because if not, I would walk through my life believing everything I hear, so I have to be a little bit
You wanna
skeptical
see
about
it.
some things that I would like to see
That's
some
valid.
evidence, because
Yeah.
if not, I would just believe that the world is flat and I would have a flat earth podcast.
Yeah.
So it's important for me to have a couple tools to rely on.
100%.
All right. So tap water's out.
Tap water's out.
Other one I wanted to know, what is your take on seed oils?
Total trash.
Total trash. We're 2 for 2.
2 for 2. Yeah.
So-
I'll throw it all out there.
Yeah. So I'm curious to hear your perspective on them. This is something that we've been talking about a lot, is trying to eliminate them from our life. And I'm curious
it's so
from
hard.
your perspective, what
Yeah.
you think about seed oils, and not just what you think about them, but how to best handle modern life with seed oils.
Modern life with seed oils.
Should you be avoiding them altogether at all costs, carnivore MD style, or are you going to be less paranoid about it than an extremist would?
Yeah, I mean, there's a balance here, right? And like anyone who's like, I don't know, maybe seed oils aren't that bad. YouTube, how seed oils are made, how canola oil is made, and you'll probably never want to eat it ever again.
I've seen it.
The process is unbelievable.
So long.
It's terrible.
So many steps.
Well, do you know where canola oil comes from?
The canola plant.
Well, yes.
It's the little
The rapeseed plant.
It's the like husk or seed or something.
Right.
They separate that out. I was watching the whole thing. Then they sift it, and then they put it through a giant magnet, and then they press it again, and then they put it in this cooker.
Yeah.
And it like gets up to a certain temperature, and then it like expels this sludge.
Yeah.
It's pretty
And
gross.
then they like chlorinate it. The funny thing about
Diet.
seed oils in general and seeds in general and the fats and fatty acids that come out of seeds is that they're extremely delicate. So even the sunlight can denature and putrefy the fats that are in seed oils. So like olive oil should always come in a dark bottle, should never come in a glass bottle because the sunlight will putrefy the
You mean
fats.
it's okay if it's a dark glass bottle?
For like olive oil, I'm just talking about like seed oils in general, not just canola oil or sunflower seed oil. I just mean like, I'm a huge fan of olive oil. I think it's great. It's technically like from a fruit, not really a seed, but it should come in a dark bottle because even the sunlight can putrefy it. But like you look at the process of rapeseed oil, canola oil, soybean oil, like it's putrefied in the process of it being made. So like
Right.
it's unbelievably toxic, where like most high quality olive oil is not putrefied and toxic from the process. It could potentially be toxic from the way that it is like bottled and shipped and stored. But yeah, I mean, canola oil, the history of canola oil, for what it's worth, I don't know if a lot of people know this, and this is like a short little side note, and then I'll tell you my thoughts on like how crazy you should get of like eliminating it or not. But when we're looking at the history of canola oil, it actually originated during World War II. Look at any fucked up shit in our food supply came from World War II as a surplus. So we created an insane amount of lubricant, ship lubricant during World War II. We had a surplus of it, didn't know what to do with it, put it in our food supply. So we like created this this lubricant that was used on ships and converted it into a edible form, and then it got subsidized, marketed like fucking crazy, and then there was all these paid research papers that were done from large scientists paid by USDA, FDA, all these like massive corporations to essentially skew the research and say that canola oil is heart healthy and high quality and the best for whatever. And this is a pretty common thing, unfortunately, in the food industry. And then, when I was talking about becoming an RD, not becoming an RD, and when I was like, I don't know what I think about that, because of the hands that USDA, FDA, Monsanto, Pepsi, all these large food corporations and big pharma, quite frankly, have on the RD programs, I was like, I don't want to be influenced by the way that I'm learning about food by these like huge corporations and big pharma, because they're all in bed together. And I knew that back then. I think a lot of people knew that and have known that who have been in the nutrition field for a long period of time, but like it just came out. Max Lugavere just did a podcast and talked about this of that it's like officially been marked down that USDA, FDA, Monsanto, all those people have been paying the RD program to push certain nutrition things with my plate and food recommendations, US FDA guidelines around food.
That's incredible. I don't know if this was in connection
You hate to
with
think
that.
it's true, but it is.
Sucks. There was one where they were talking about the history of cornflakes, and I don't know how close that is.
Yeah.
You
It's
can
pretty
correct
fucked.
me if I'm wrong, but essentially cornflakes were designed to take, a relatively crazy group of people who are held in some sort of ward, and they wanted to diminish their sex drive and libido and energy levels. So they created this cornflake, this highly processed, highly seed oil based food to give to them to repress their tendencies. As I don't know what those people had wrong with them. I don't remember if they were predators or, just crazy. I don't know what they were, but they were trying to suppress their energy levels. And then they took cornflakes after that and made it into the cereal that is now sold to everyone.
It's freaking crazy. I haven't heard the the predator element of that, but I do
that
know
part
like
could be
Quaker.
Wrong. I don't know.
But Quaker Oats, like that dude was a Quaker, and he thought that like sexual sin was the worst of all sins, and he was trying to take away sex drive from people.
Maybe I'm combining those two, but I don't know if I knew that.
Maybe it's the same story and we're both missing pieces. I don't know, but
maybe it happened in two different places. That's crazy. So the Quaker Oats,
is it Quaker Oats? I might be fucking that up. Fact check me on that. But there is a dude, I'm blanking on his name. I don't know why I'm thinking Quaker Oats, but there was a dude who that was like his whole ploy. He's the one that started creating breakfast cereals. I think it was Quaker Oats.
Maybe it was, I don't know, Cornflakes guy or Quaker Oats.
Wasn't Cornflakes from
or
Quaker?
Kellogg.
Was it Kellogg? Kellogg's the company. I don't know.
I don't know either.
But in terms of chaos, to answer your question, how crazy should we be around seed oils? I think that it's whatever's going to stress you out the most. If it's going to stress you out to be a fucking neurotic, crazy person and be like Paul Saladino, not that he's like fucking crazy neurotic, but like, that dude's extremely strict. Some people are okay with that. Some people it doesn't cause disordered eating patterns and they're totally fine. Like I have a shitload of clients where like if we got that restrictive with them, they'd lose their minds and like it's not worth it. Yeah. So, I mean, my approach is like I'm going to live my life. I'm going to eat some like fried chicken wings, gluten-free because of a fucking gluten allergy, but like I'm going to enjoy myself. And like 90% of the time I'm eating home cooked meals from extremely high quality stuff. And then like I exist in this era. I exist in this where the food is and where our world is at, and like I'm gonna enjoy it while I'm here. I'm not gonna like not go out to dinner with you guys because you're like, hey, let's go like get this great fucking food, and like I'm not gonna call the restaurant and be like, do you guys use seed oils? That's unacceptable, and then bring my own fucking oil and then like make them cook with my lard that I got from RC. Like I'm not gonna go that bananas. If I was really sick, like there's been life chapters where I'm like I can eat like 5 things and anything beyond that I'm flaring like crazy. Like I'm not in that chapter anymore. So I'm not going to be crazy about it. So You got to fight your battles.
Well, Cait, thank you so much for coming on. I am significantly smarter now.
Sweet.
And
Happy to hear it.
Yeah, hopefully we can do this again sometime soon. Get some more community in our lives.
Sounds good. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Stay well, guys.